It's the holiday seasons, so I'm sure you'll forgive me taking a little bit of a sidestep from the usual gaming cultural coverage to instead gush a little bit over one of my favourite series getting a return in the form of WARNO, standing for Warning Order. It is to be a real-time strategy game set in the Cold War that is going to be entering into early access in just a month, and it came pretty much out of nowhere. Now, if you have never heard about WARNO before, that's because it hasn't existed before. When I say that this is an entry into one of my favorite series, it's because it's, well, basically, Wargame. In case you're unaware, Wargame European Escalation was a lovely little real-time strategy game released back in 2012, I believe, as a kind of spiritual successor in its own right to the preceding Ruse game, which was a very interesting World War II strategy game that it didn't quite live up to the hype, really. It was too simplistic in the combat, in the ruses themselves, and the general gameplay. It was very arcadey, and in all due reality, it was essentially the prototype of what would eventually become Wargame. Unfortunately, the producers of Wargame have, through some series of thingy-bobs, lost control of the Wargame name, and so instead we now have WARNO, which, I can't lie, is a way worse name than Wargame, but hey, you play with the hand you're dealt, don't you? So, what is all of this? Well, as you might be able to tell from the gameplay rolling in the background, it is a real-time strategy game set in the Cold War, and it is fought on an absolutely massive scale. That is the beauty of Wargame. You've got dozens of units, and in a match you've got several hundreds. They even have a 10v10 game mode, which is not balanced in the slightest. But by God, is it fun to have 20 players beat the shit out of one another's armies, and it runs on this absolutely beautiful little engine that the developers managed to cook up. It's buttery smooth. There is no lag, even with hundreds of units on screen, all fighting, moving, shooting, artillery shells, airstrikes, helicopters, ATGMs, cannon fire, machine guns. It is a real goddamn technological achievement, as it's not ugly either by any stretch of the imagination. The units are damn pretty, the environments are damn pretty, and they're high detail too. Here, let me show you one of the screenshots of this wonderful little, this is a Lux, I believe. Yes, a Lux. I mean, look at that. Look at that. And this is a game that has have maps measured in the square kilometers with hundreds of these little things bumping about. It is very, very impressive. It is, however, also a bit of an RTS for the especially interested, shall we say. As whilst it is not at all difficult to play Wargame, it is extraordinarily difficult to master Wargame. The art of attacking in this game is... it's one that requires a hell of a lot of learning and time to actually figure out how to do effectively, as charging into the teeth of essentially modern-day weaponry will lead to a great quantity of casualties, and will require you to use every tool at your disposal. It'll need artillery support, it'll need covering fire, it'll need some infantry, it'll need some IFVs, it'll need some tanks, it'll need the usage of smoke and everything else in between. But once you actually start getting a hold of it, it is also a very satisfying game to actually get good at. The game also requires a fair bit of actual knowledge about the time, the setting, and military equipment. You do have to know what an Abrams tank is, what an M60 is, what a T-72 is, what an M24 Hind is, etc., etc. Because when you see the enemy unit, you've only got a handful of seconds most of the time to figure out how to deal with it before it begins murdering your units. So you've got to know what they're capable of, what they're good at, what they're bad at, and how to actually deal with those enemies. This is not as easy as it sounds because, unlike many real-time strategy games that perhaps have a couple dozen units, WARNO will be launching with 600 units, which you will be making a customized, specialized deck from, and then bringing those units onto the field. So whilst you will have a kind of generalistic idea of what you might be coming up against depending upon the nation you're playing against, until you're actually on the field and start seeing the enemy's units, you won't know what they are. And even when you're seeing them, unless, again, you know what they are, you're not going to get told before they're, well, shooting at you. This is probably one of the steepest barriers to entry in damn near video gaming, honestly, which is why I'm also very happy to see that they will be introducing a proper campaign mode this time around. Wargame did have some campaigns, and they had some really cool ideas and some decent storytelling and presentation as well, but the AI is just not designed to be fought against, honestly. This was a problem with Steel Division as well, which started with the army campaign system, where you essentially have a full dynamic single-player campaign where you are given a ton of various formations, divisions, battalions, regiments, etc., that you need to move around the map and engage the enemy. It was really, really cool, and they're going to be reintroducing that in WARNO. The problem is, again, the AI. The AI functions basically thusly. It has X amount of points, which it can use to call in units, just as you do. The AI will call in every single unit it can, and continue calling in every single unit it can every solitary second, and a move straight down your throat continuously. Oh, don't get me wrong. It can be effective, as you are faced with an AI constantly spending all of its money and constantly engaging you with everything it's got at every single instance, but it doesn't make for a very fun experience, and it means that the AI only has one trick, making it very easy to counter once you know what you're doing. They have mentioned, though, that in WARNO there would also be pre-scripted scenarios, which sounds a lot more interesting, because then you might actually be dealing with a, well, simulated enemy commander. It'll be scripted, so once you've completed the mission once, you'll know what to expect, but at the very least then you will be up against a varying foe, so one scenario will be completely different from the other scenario, rather than just being the same mass Zerg rush repeated ad infinitum. I am definitely looking forward to seeing what they can do with that kind of a campaign, though, because it would be a very nice introduction for new players and a way to ease them into the whole unit recognition things a little bit more softly and gently, rather than throwing them in the deep end of the pool immediately. There's also a mention that they will be keeping the same old deck building system, I'm almost certain, but they will also apparently be adding on a military formation layer, where you will have various brigades and units with their, quote, unique identities to act as the parent division of your personal battle group, end quote. I'm wondering what that means. Is it like in Steel Division, where you have literal divisions, which you have to choose between, and then you select your units dependent upon that division? Or could this be a further level of specialization? In Wargame, for example, you picked your nation. Say you picked France, for example. And then you picked a specialization, if you wanted, like mechanized. If you picked mechanized, you would gain access to certain units that were only available to mechanized formations, but you would lose access to all of the units that weren't available to the mechanized formation. In return for this, in some cases, crippling sacrifice, however, you would get way more slots for those units. So you built the deck by two factors. One was points. So you had so and so many points to pick units with, and then you had so and so many slots in the various types of units. So and so many artillery slots, so and so many tank slots, so and so many infantry slots, and so on. And picking mechanized would give you a lot bigger of a selection in the infantry section, making them excellent defensive decks. Maybe it'll be something like that, or maybe it'll just be a bonus, a flat bonus to veterancy or accuracy, perhaps. We'll have to wait and see, I suppose. And that really is one of the key things here, isn't it? We don't know much about this. From the screenshots and the gameplay, it basically looks like Wargame. But it's gotta be a bit more than just Wargame too, surely, because this is actually a setting that there's some competition heading Eugene's way. They used to be the only ones making this style of strategy, Wargame and Steel Division, but now we've also got Regiment on the way, and we've also got Broken Arrow, both of which look very, very interesting, mind you. There's some mention also of that the terrain might be more important this time around, with hills and villages and dense forests. I'm assuming that they won't allow tanks to chill out in the dense forest anymore. That was a very good change from Steel Division. In Wargame, you see, tanks could chill out in the middle of a forest, which made them basically impossible to spot, meaning that attacking a forest filled with enemy tanks was, an interesting proposition, shall we say, whereas in Steel Division, tanks were not allowed to hide in forests, which made the gameplay a lot more dynamic, in my opinion. Speaking of that too, there's also a mention of what sounds like a new mechanic in the form of off-map fire missions. Now, there have been off-map call-ins previously in the form of airstrikes, but you'd think they'd call it airstrikes in that case. It sounds more like off-map artillery. This is something that was in Steel Division 2, where there were certain spotter units that were able to call in off-map artillery barrages, and they could be incredibly good and very, very useful, or an absolute uncontested waste of points and deck slots. So maybe something a little bit more in the middle there would be appreciated. There is also a final mention of the Smart Orders system. Quote, take advantage of a host of quality of life enhancements catering to new players and veterans of Eugene System's previous titles. This includes issuing commands during pre-combat deployment, thank God, rules of engagement, AI-assisted smart orders, and much more. I'm curious to see if they've added something more there, because I actually really enjoy Eugene's way of doing things in this regard. One of the problems with RTS games, particularly of this type, which require a fair bit of foreknowledge and are relatively realistic and very tactical, is that the barrier to entry is huge, and new players are likely to get their asses busted open without even having the faintest clue what they're doing wrong. The Smart Order system was a very interesting attempt to... Well, here's the thing. All too often, these RTS games are being simplified to lower that barrier to entry, which means that complexity is being removed. This is the paradox in the creative assembly way of doing things. Eugene instead attempted to add in various orders that would reduce the micromanagement and allow the players more tools. The rules of engagement, for example. Instead of having to babysit your anti-tank gun to make sure it only fired when it actually had a chance to penetrate the enemy's armor, you can actually click on it and set the rules of engagement saying, okay, you are only going to fire when you have so and so much of a percent of a chance on hit and so much of a percentage chance of actually penetrating the enemy armor. Meaning that now the unit was fully autonomous. It would engage or wait to engage depending upon its settings and depending upon the unit it was engaging. A really cool idea. The Smart Order system as well was a very interesting initiative where you could issue a smart order to attack an enemy position, and the AI would actually then go like, okay, these are the units at my disposal, this is how I'm going to attack it. It would move up. If it got fired at, it would engage. If it got overwhelmingly shot at, it might decide to withdraw those units. If an infantry unit was suppressed, it might retreat it back to a safe position, reorganize, and then launch the attack again. It was really cool. It was nowhere near as good at attacking as the player was, obviously, but if you've got tons of units to deal with and you just need something to attack a generally weakly defended location or as a diversionary attempt, for example, it was a really cool idea. And if they could add in more levels of that, say that, for example, I can make a little battle group of tanks, infantry, and some mortars, and then give the attack order, and the AI is like, alright, Alright, well, I'm going to attack over there. So it moves out into the open and it gets shot at. It goes, whoa, 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 enemy. Backs off into cover and then calls in the mortars to suppress where the enemy was shooting from. Then, after a quick little suppression barrage, it dumps some smoke and it tries another attack. That'd be very interesting. Some of these are rather, conscientious as well, or contentious, I should say. For example, the counter battery order in Steel Division 2. Now, this is an order where you tell your artillery, alright, I'm not going to use you, I'm going to set you on automatic, and your job is to locate and counter battery enemy artillery. Personally, I actually really love that because it means that artillery is less overpowered. There's been a problem in the Wargame series for a very long time, that artillery kinda is the end-all and be-all, both in killing and suppressing. With the counter-battery order, you can actually have units dedicated to suppressing and destroying enemy artillery, making it way less interesting to just blast random barrages for no particular reason and use just artillery to break open your enemy's front lines. On the other hand, however, it also meant that certain artillery guns were essentially useless. If your artillery wasn't tracked, if it was just guns limbered on the battlefield, they were now just worthless, because enemy counter battery would find them, shoot them, and more than likely destroy them, meaning that you just wasted a huge amount of points for absolutely nothing. Again, a more complex system would be nice there, because in reality, of course, counter battery fire was not by any stretch of the imagination an exact science. They were using various rangefinds, like sound, for example. They had these really cool and intricate systems, which would be like, okay, I hear something over there, and then I see a flash so and so many seconds previously to hearing the thunder. Therefore, I can judge that the enemy artillery, based on the differential between seeing the flash and hearing the noise, is so and so many kilometers away. And judging by the direction, I can also figure that they're roundabout in this kind of bearing, so send that data to the gunners and start shelling the general area. It was not particularly accurate, and it really should be far more of a suppression thing rather than an actual killing thing. It should have a chance to kill something. Of course, if you get a direct hit on an enemy artillery piece, well, that's just the luck of war, and you should be rewarded / punished for it, but it shouldn't be, just there to murder the enemy's artillery. A bit more of call-in arting might also be a way to getting around this, allowing you to bring in suppressing barrages on enemy positions without getting your shit murdered in the process. I'm gushing now, aren't I? I'm really excited to see this, and it's coming out in early access in just a month's time, so we are definitely going to be having a look at this on the channel when it comes out. And it's just nice to just talk about a game I really like on occasion, instead of having to talk about Ubisoft preparing to push NFTs onto people whether they want them or not. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.